The ship broke through the gray clouds, its metal wings cutting across the sky of an unknown world. Daniel stood at the viewing deck, his eyes fixed on the land below. He had traveled across many stars, seen deserts that stretched forever and oceans that swallowed light, but this world felt different. The forests shimmered silver under the pale sun, and valleys carved into the surface looked like scars that never healed. The crew around him moved quickly, checking controls and reading instruments. There were 5 of them in total, each one skilled, but Daniel carried the weight of leadership. He was not just a captain, he was the one who had convinced them to come here. Reports had spoken of strange signals, whispers across space that no machine could explain. Daniel believed there was life here, waiting to be found. The ship landed on soft ground near the edge of a valley. The earth looked like ash but felt alive under their boots. Daniel stepped out first, the air cool and sharp in his lungs. The silver trees rose high above them, their leaves making faint ringing sounds as the wind passed through. For a moment, it was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then the sound came. It started faint, like the cry of a lost child. But soon it grew louder, spreading across the valley like waves. It was not just one voice. Many voices rose together, crying in long, sorrowful tones. The sound was not language, not music, yet it carried weight that made the heart ache. The crew froze. One of them whispered, "What is that?" but Daniel raised his hand for silence. He listened closely. The cries seemed to move, circling through the valley. They were filled with grief, but also something deeper, something that held meaning. "We are not alone," Daniel said softly. The group moved carefully through the trees, their scanners active but finding little. The cries continued, echoing from every direction, until finally, they reached a clearing. There, hidden among the silver roots, stood figures unlike any human. They were tall and slender, their skin pale like moonlight. Their eyes shone softly, reflecting the faint glow of the forest. Each one wore simple woven garments, but their faces told more than their clothes. Tears ran freely down their cheeks, falling silently to the ground. They did not speak, only cried, their voices joining together like a chorus of sorrow. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had seen war, he had seen people suffer, but never had he heard such raw grief. It was as if the land itself was mourning through them. He took one step forward, careful not to startle them. The tribe turned their glowing eyes toward him, but they did not run. They only cried. One of them, smaller than the rest, stepped forward. A girl, perhaps no older than a young teen in human years, with long hair that shone like silver threads under the pale light. Her tears glistened as they fell, but her eyes held a quiet strength. She raised her hand slightly, not in fear but in recognition, as though she had been waiting. Daniel slowly removed his glove and extended his hand. The crew watched in silence. The girl did not touch him, but she moved close enough for him to see her trembling fingers. Her lips parted, yet no words came. Instead, a soft wail escaped her throat, rising gently like a question. Daniel understood in that moment that this tribe was not silent by choice. Something had taken their voices long ago, leaving only their cries. Their tears were not weakness, they were memory, a way to hold on to what was lost. The girl lowered her hand and stepped back toward her people. They all turned together and began moving deeper into the valley. But she looked back once, her glowing eyes locking with Daniel's, and for a brief second, he felt the weight of her sorrow. It was not just grief, it was a call. "We follow," Daniel said firmly. The crew hesitated, but his tone allowed no debate. They moved after the tribe, their boots crunching softly against the ash ground. The cries guided them, carrying through the forest as if marking a path. Night began to fall, but the sky never turned black. Instead, it glowed faint blue, and the stars above were hidden behind swirling clouds. In that strange twilight, the tribe stopped at the mouth of a cavern carved into the valley wall. Their cries grew louder, echoing against the stone, vibrating in the air. The girl appeared again, standing at the entrance. She lifted her hand and pointed toward the cavern, inviting Daniel and his crew inside. He nodded, though his heart raced. Something waited in that darkness, something older than the tribe itself. As they entered, the cries grew stronger, not from fear but from memory. The walls were covered in crystal veins that reflected the sound, turning every wail into 1,000 voices. Daniel felt his knees weaken. It was as if the cavern itself was alive, holding the sorrow of generations. The girl stepped forward and pressed her palm against the crystal. Her tears fell upon it, and the stone began to glow faintly. For the first time, Daniel understood. These people were not only crying, they were remembering. Their tears were their history, etched into the land itself. The crew looked at him, waiting for his decision. Daniel did not speak. He only placed his own hand against the crystal, closing his eyes. The cries entered him, filling his heart with their story. A story of loss, silence, and endless grief. And with that touch, Daniel knew his journey had only just begun. The cavern air was heavy with sound. The cries of the tribe echoed through the crystals, filling every space like a storm of sorrow. Daniel kept his hand pressed to the glowing wall, feeling the strange vibration beneath his skin. It was not just noise. Each cry seemed to carry a piece of meaning, fragments of something unspoken. His crew stood close behind him, uneasy. They had traveled across worlds and faced dangers before, but none of them had ever faced something so strange. Machines they understood, weapons they could fight, but this was different. It was a storm of emotions made alive, and it shook them more than any enemy could. Daniel lowered his hand and turned to the young humanoid girl who had guided them. She stood near the crystal, her glowing eyes watching him carefully. Tears still streamed down her face, but her expression was calm. Daniel sensed she wanted to tell him something, though she had no words. He stepped closer and knelt so his gaze met hers. "Myra," he whispered softly, giving her a name since he could not ask hers. The girl blinked, her expression softening as if she accepted it. She raised her hand and pointed first at herself, then at him. Then she pressed her fingers to her heart and let out a low, steady cry. Daniel understood. She was not introducing herself in sound but in feeling. Her cry carried weight, like the telling of her identity. She was trying to make him understand through sorrow what words could not. He placed his hand gently over his chest, copying her gesture. "Daniel," he said firmly. Myra tilted her head, studying the sound of his name. Her lips moved as if she tried to repeat it, but no sound came. Instead, a small tear slipped down her cheek, and she touched her heart again. Something passed between them in that moment. It was not language but connection, a silent bond formed out of shared recognition. Daniel knew she trusted him enough to try, and that trust carried more power than words ever could. The other members of the tribe gathered around them, their cries still rising and falling. Daniel's crew shifted uneasily, whispering to one another. One of them, a man named Paul, stepped forward. "Captain, what are we doing here? These people don't speak. All they do is cry. We can't stay in this cavern forever." Daniel did not look away from Myra. "We are not leaving," he said firmly. "Not until we understand." Paul frowned but stepped back. The others followed Daniel's lead, though worry was clear on their faces. Myra turned and motioned for Daniel to follow. She led him deeper into the cavern, where the crystals grew brighter. Each step echoed with cries, and the sound grew stronger. Soon they entered a wide chamber, its walls covered in crystal veins that shimmered like frozen rivers of light. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pillar, worn smooth with time. Upon it lay small drops of hardened crystal, shaped like teardrops. Myra picked one up and held it carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She handed it to Daniel. The teardrop was cool and smooth, glowing faintly in his hand. When he touched it, a flood of images filled his mind, shadows of towering cities, tall figures walking proudly, then fire and machines breaking everything apart. The images faded, leaving only the echo of cries. Daniel gasped and tightened his grip on the crystal. He understood now. The tribe's tears were not just water. They carried memory. Every drop that fell was a piece of history, preserved in the crystal veins of the cavern. The Wailing tribe remembered their past through sorrow, storing it in the land itself. Myra watched him closely, her glowing eyes searching for his reaction. Daniel looked at her and nodded slowly. "Your tears," he said softly. "They are your story?" Myra's face softened, and though she did not smile, her eyes shone with a quiet relief. She pressed her own hand to the crystal pillar, and another teardrop formed and hardened before Daniel's eyes. She picked it up and placed it carefully in his palm, as if she was giving him a part of herself. Daniel held it tightly. He had been right to come here. Humanity was not just explorers of space but seekers of truth. This tribe had lived in silence for centuries, their voices stolen, their sorrow endless. Yet they endured, and through their tears, they carried a legacy no empire could erase. The cries around him began to soften, no longer storm-like but steady and rhythmic, almost like breathing. The tribe had seen what Myra had done, and they accepted Daniel in their circle. For the first time, the sound did not weigh heavily on his chest. Instead, it felt like an invitation. Daniel's crew watched in silence. They still did not understand fully, but they saw how Myra trusted him. And if she trusted him, perhaps there was more to discover here than sorrow. As the night deepened, the tribe guided the humans out of the cavern and into the valley. The sky was filled with its pale blue glow, and the silver trees whispered in the wind. The cries continued faintly, not as overwhelming as before, but soft and almost gentle. Myra walked beside Daniel, her steps light, her gaze forward. She did not speak, but she did not need to. Daniel knew she had chosen him as the one to carry her people's story forward. The bond was silent, but it was real. And though he did not yet know the full truth, Daniel felt the first spark of purpose. He was not just here to explore. He was here to listen, to carry the tears of the tribe into a future where their sorrow might one day be lifted. The morning light spread gently across the valley. The silver trees caught the sun and shone like rivers of glass. Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the Wailing tribe move quietly through their day. They did not speak, but their cries carried through the air in soft waves. It was no longer strange to him. It was their way of living, their way of remembering. Myra walked beside him, her pale hair catching the light. She pointed toward the distant ridges, then at the ground beneath them. Her cries rose and fell in a steady rhythm, almost like a chant. Daniel listened carefully, trying to read her gestures. He had begun to notice a pattern. Their cries had tones that shifted with meaning. The higher wails carried sorrow, while the deeper ones carried memory. She tugged lightly at his sleeve, urging him to follow. Daniel motioned for his crew to stay close. Together they walked through the valley, the ground soft like ash under their boots. The cries of the tribe followed them, spreading out as if guiding their steps. They climbed a narrow path carved into the rock. At the top, the land opened into a wide plateau. Ruins stretched before them, broken towers, fallen bridges, and shattered walls. The stone was smooth, carved with markings long faded but still strong in shape. This was no simple village. It had once been a great city. Daniel's breath caught. So they had a civilization, he whispered to himself. Myra moved slowly through the ruins, her glowing eyes searching every broken wall. She placed her hand on the stone and released a long, heavy cry. The sound echoed, bouncing between the ruins. Daniel felt his chest tighten again. He realized this place was once alive with voices, with laughter, with movement. Now only cries remained. The crew spread out, scanning the structures. Paul crouched near a broken pillar, running his fingers across strange symbols. "This isn't random," he said. "They had writing. Complex writing." Daniel nodded. "And it's gone now. Replaced by sorrow." As they explored, Myra guided Daniel to a half-buried doorway. The entrance was blocked with stone, but with help from the crew, they cleared a path. Inside was a chamber untouched by wind or rain. The walls were covered with carvings, scenes of tall humanoids standing beneath great machines. Their hands reached upward, but chains bound their limbs. Above them, metal figures with sharp bodies towered, their heads glowing with harsh light. Daniel studied the carvings in silence. The story was clear. The tribe had once been free and proud, but something had come, machines built for domination. They had stripped the people of their voices, leaving only silence and sorrow. Myra's cries grew louder inside the chamber. She touched one of the carvings, her tears falling onto the stone. The sound of her wail filled the space, vibrating against the walls. The crew shifted uneasily, but Daniel stayed still. He understood. This was her way of keeping the past alive. He whispered, "You remember through sorrow." Myra turned to him, her glowing eyes full of grief, but also of hope that he understood. She pressed her hand to her heart and then touched the carving again. The message was clear. The machines had taken their voices, but they had not taken their memory. Their tears were their resistance. Daniel clenched his fists. He had seen empires rise and fall across the stars, but this was different. These people had endured centuries of silence, yet they survived. Humanity had always fought with words, fire, and steel, but this tribe had fought with tears. As the group left the chamber, the cries of the tribe outside grew stronger, echoing through the ruins. Daniel realized they were not just mourning. They were teaching. Every cry carried fragments of their history, passed from one generation to the next. Back at the clearing, the tribe gathered around a great fire. They did not speak, but their cries rose together, forming a chorus that filled the valley. The sound was not chaotic. It had rhythm, as if every voice carried a part of a story that only made sense when heard together. Daniel sat among them, Myra close by his side. He closed his eyes and listened. He began to see pictures in his mind: the shining cities, the coming of the machines, the silence that followed. The cries painted the past not with words but with feeling. For the first time, Daniel felt as if he was part of their memory. The crew sat apart, still uneasy, but even they could not escape the power of the sound. One of them whispered, "It's like they're singing history." Daniel opened his eyes and looked at Myra. She had given him a gift greater than language. She had shown him how her people endured. Humanity had always believed strength came from voice, from the power to speak and command. But here, strength came from sorrow, from refusing to let grief die. The night deepened, and the cries slowly faded into quiet sobs. Myra leaned against a stone and let her tears fall softly. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just an explorer. He had stepped into the memory of a people who had carried their pain for generations. He whispered into the night, "You will not be forgotten." Myra lifted her gaze to him. For the first time, her lips curved slightly, not into a full smile but into something close to it. A silent acknowledgement. And Daniel knew then that the sorrow of the Wailing tribe was more than grief. It was a weapon. A hidden past that, if understood, could change everything. The ruins stood silent under the pale blue sky, but Daniel could not shake the feeling that something unseen was moving beneath the ground. The carvings of machines in the hidden chamber stayed sharp in his mind. The Wailing tribe had not invented those images. They were memories of a past so heavy that even after centuries, their cries still carried its weight. That night, the tribe gathered around the great fire again. The cries rose together, stronger than before. Daniel sat among them, listening with more focus than ever. He had begun to hear differences in the tones. Some carried sorrow, others carried warning. Myra sat close to him, her glowing eyes fixed on the flames. Her cries blended with the others, yet hers always reached him as if they were meant only for him. The crew stayed further back. Paul paced nervously, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Captain," he whispered, "we shouldn't stay here. These ruins aren't empty. Something about this place feels wrong." Daniel looked at him steadily. "What do you mean?" Paul gestured toward the ground. "Our scanners picked up faint energy signatures. Very old, but still active. Like something sleeping under the earth." Daniel's jaw tightened. He remembered the carvings of tall, sharp-bodied machines. If those were not only history but warning, then the tribe's cries made new sense. They were not only remembering sorrow, they were fearing its return. Before he could answer, the air shifted. A deep vibration spread through the ground, faint but growing. The fire flickered. The tribe's cries changed suddenly, rising into sharp tones filled with fear. They all turned toward the valley, their glowing eyes wide. Myra clutched Daniel's arm, pulling him to his feet. She pointed toward the horizon where the ridges stood dark against the blue sky. At first, Daniel saw nothing. Then a flash of red light cut through the darkness, followed by a low mechanical hum. The crew scrambled to their gear. "Captain, it's not natural," Paul shouted. "Something's powering up out there." The tribe's cries filled the air, louder and more frantic. It was as if the entire valley was wailing at once. Daniel steadied himself, his heart racing. Humanity had always believed the past stayed buried, but here it was rising again. He turned to Myra. "The machines," he said firmly, though he knew she could not understand his words. But her expression told him she did. Her tears fell faster, her cries rising like a warning call. She had brought him to the ruins to show him the past, and now that past was no longer history, it was returning. The ground shook. Far off, in the direction of the ruins, a structure began to rise from the earth. It was massive, its surface made of blackened metal, covered in cracks but still alive with energy. The hum grew into a roar as parts of it unfolded, glowing with sharp light. The wailing tribe fell to their knees, their cries piercing the air. Daniel's crew raised their scanners, faces pale. "It's some kind of machine fortress," one of them muttered. "And it's waking up." Daniel's voice was steady though his chest tightened. "Then we cannot run. If this rises, it will not stop with them. It will spread. And humanity will be next." Myra grabbed his hand suddenly, pressing it against her chest. Her cries shifted, softer now, almost pleading. She was asking him not to leave them, not to abandon her people to face their ancient enemy alone. Daniel met her glowing eyes. "We stay," he said firmly. The crew exchanged uneasy looks, but none of them argued. They had followed Daniel through battles before, and they knew his voice carried no doubt when he had made a choice. The machine fortress continued to rise, its form towering like a mountain of steel. Red lights flickered across its surface, and strange echoes of metallic voices carried on the wind. It was not alive, not in the way flesh was, but it had purpose. That purpose was domination, the same as centuries ago. The cries of the tribe shifted again. They were no longer only fear. They grew sharper, stronger, almost like a call to resist. Daniel listened closely and realized something important. Their cries were not powerless. They were resonating in the air, vibrating against the metal echoes. Perhaps sorrow itself carried strength he had not yet understood. "Myra," he said, turning to her. "Your cries matter. They can fight." She did not know his words, but she saw the determination in his eyes. She nodded once, her tears glowing in the firelight. Daniel turned to his crew. We prepare. We defend them. If those machines rise fully, this valley will become a grave. But if we stand together, maybe we can turn it into something else. The crew got to work, pulling out tools and weapons. They were few, but humans had never needed large numbers to fight. What they lacked in strength, they always made up for in resilience and spirit. The night passed with the cries of the tribe echoing through the valley. The fire burned low, and shadows of the rising machine fortress stretched across the land. Daniel sat with Myra, their hands close though not touching, the silence between cries heavy with unspoken resolve. The machines of the past had returned, awakened by mistake or fate. But this time, the Wailing tribe was not alone. Humanity had come, and humanity did not turn away from sorrow. Daniel looked at the rising fortress, his voice quiet but filled with certainty. This time, we fight together. The sun rose pale over the valley, its light falling across the silver forest and the ruins. The machine fortress loomed in the distance, a black shape on the horizon. Its red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, slow but steady, promising danger. Daniel stood at the edge of the tribe's clearing, watching the horizon. His crew moved behind him, checking weapons, scanning energy readings, preparing for whatever came next. But Daniel's thoughts were not only on the machines. They were on the Wailing tribe, who sat together with their heads bowed, their cries rising and falling like the tide. He turned toward Myra. She sat on a flat stone, her pale hair shining in the morning light, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She did not speak, but her tears carried her meaning. She wanted to know if he would stay, if he would fight for them. Daniel knelt before her. We fight, he said firmly. She did not understand the word, but she understood the strength in his tone. She pressed her hand to her chest and let out a steady cry. Daniel nodded. They were bound together now, humans and humanoids, by a shared purpose. The crew gathered, uneasy but ready. Paul crossed his arms. Captain, we're few. They're many. And these people, they don't fight. They cry. What can they do against machines? Daniel looked at him, his eyes steady. We've seen it already. Their cries are more than sorrow. They shake the air, they carry force. The machines fear them, or they would not have tried to silence them long ago. We'll teach them to use what they already have. The words settled over the crew. They had followed Daniel through worse odds before, and they trusted his instinct. The day began with lessons. Daniel stood in the center of the clearing, his crew around him, and the tribe gathered in a wide circle. Myra stood closest, her glowing eyes never leaving him. Daniel picked up a stone and threw it at a crystal wall near the edge of the clearing. The stone struck, sending a sharp sound through the air. The tribe flinched, but Daniel raised his hand. Then he let out a sharp shout, his human voice echoing across the valley. It was not sorrow, but strength. The tribe looked at him, startled. He pointed at them, then at the crystal wall. Cry, he said, his tone commanding. Myra understood first. She stepped forward, pressed her hand to her chest, and released a long, heavy wail. The cry carried through the air and struck the crystal wall. The crystal vibrated, glowing faintly. The tribe gasped, their tears falling faster. Daniel nodded firmly. Again, he said. One by one, others stepped forward. Their cries joined Myra's, rising together in a wave of sound. The crystal wall shook harder, cracks forming on its surface. Daniel's crew exchanged looks of surprise. Their sorrow was not only memory, it was power. Daniel raised his arm, his voice strong. This is your strength. This is your voice. Together, it will break the silence the machines forced on you. The tribe cried louder, their voices weaving into one another until the valley itself seemed to tremble. The crystals around them glowed brightly, humming with energy. For the first time, Daniel saw fire in their glowing eyes. It was not only grief anymore. It was defiance. When the cries finally softened, the tribe looked to him. They waited, trusting. Daniel felt the weight of their hope pressing on his chest, but he did not falter. That night, they trained again. The crew set up simple defenses using what little equipment they had, combining human tools with the tribe's ruins. Barricades of crystal and stone were raised. Small traps were hidden along the valley paths. The tribe watched closely, learning quickly. Their cries echoed each time they tested the defenses, shaking the traps until they triggered. Myra stayed close to Daniel, always listening, always learning. She mimicked his hand signals, repeating them until she could guide others herself. Though her tears never stopped, her cries had changed. They were no longer only sorrowful. They were strong, sharp, filled with purpose. As the sky darkened, the hum of the machine fortress grew louder. Red lights flashed across the horizon, and shapes began to move. Tall, thin machines stepped from the fortress, their limbs sharp, their heads glowing red. They moved with slow, certain steps, scanning the land. The Wailing tribe gathered at the clearing, their cries rising in warning. Daniel stood at the front with Myra by his side. His crew formed a line behind them, weapons ready. The ground shook as the machines drew nearer, their glowing eyes fixed on the valley. Daniel raised his hand, steady and strong. "This is it," he said. He looked at Myra. "Your voices are your weapons. Do not fear them. Let the world hear your sorrow, and let it break the silence they forced upon you." Myra's tears fell, but her gaze was steady. She pressed her hand to her heart and released a cry so powerful it shook the silver trees. The tribe followed her, their cries rising together in a storm of sound. The valley trembled, the crystals glowed, and even the machines seemed to falter for a moment. Daniel felt the air shake around him, and he knew then that the machines had awakened a force they could not control. Humanity had come not to conquer but to remind the Wailing tribe of their strength. The machines marched closer, their red lights cutting through the night. Daniel tightened his grip on his weapon, his voice steady as he gave the command. Together. The cries of the tribe rose higher, filling the valley with a sound that carried both sorrow and hope. Humanity and the Wailing tribe stood as one, ready for the battle that would decide their future. The valley was quiet for a moment, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the machines advanced. Their tall frames glowed with red light, their metal limbs moving with sharp precision. The ground shook beneath their heavy steps. Daniel stood at the front, Myra at his side, and the Wailing tribe behind them. His crew formed a small line, weapons ready, but he knew weapons alone would not be enough. The machines had strength, numbers, and ancient design built for war. What the humans and the tribe had was something different: spirit and sorrow turned into power. Daniel raised his hand. "Now," he said firmly. Myra pressed her hand to her chest and let out a cry so sharp it rang through the air like a bell. The tribe followed her, their cries rising together into a wave of sound. The valley trembled. Crystals in the ground glowed bright, pulsing with energy. The air itself seemed to vibrate. The first line of machines halted for a moment, their red lights flickering. Their movements slowed, as if the cries disrupted something deep inside them. Daniel saw his chance. "Hold them," he shouted. His crew fired their weapons, bursts of light striking the machines' joints and heads. Some staggered, sparks flying, but others pushed forward. Their glowing eyes burned red, their sharp limbs cutting through stone and crystal. The cries grew louder. Myra's voice carried above all others, her wail steady and strong. The tribe's tears fell like rain, but their sorrow was no longer weakness. It was force. The sound struck the machines, shaking their frames, cracking their armor. One machine lifted its arm to strike. Daniel rushed forward, firing his weapon into its chest. It faltered, but the blow would not have been enough alone. Then a cry from Myra surged through the air, and the machine's head shattered, its light fading as it collapsed to the ground. Daniel turned back, his chest pounding. "You see," he shouted. "Your cries are stronger than their silence. Keep going." The tribe wailed louder, their voices merging into one storm of sound. The valley glowed brighter as the crystals pulsed with their energy. The machines staggered, their red lights flickering wildly. But the fortress in the distance roared to life. More machines poured out, rows of them marching in unison. Their steps shook the valley, and their glowing eyes locked on the humans and the tribe. Daniel clenched his jaw. They were outnumbered, but he did not back down. Humanity had always fought against impossible odds. This battle would be no different. "Pull back to the barricades," he ordered. The crew guided the tribe behind the defenses they had built from stone and crystal. The machines charged forward, striking against the barricades with sharp arms. But each time they attacked, the cries of the tribe pushed back, shaking the machines and slowing their strikes. Paul fired his weapon through a gap in the wall. "Captain, the cries are disrupting them. It's interfering with their systems." Daniel nodded. "Then we use it. Keep the tribe crying together. That's our weapon." Myra moved to the front, her glowing eyes fierce. She lifted both hands to the sky and released a cry so powerful that the air rippled. The machines nearest to her convulsed, their limbs locking. Cracks split across their armor, and they collapsed one after another. The tribe followed her lead. Their cries rose higher, stronger, like thunder rolling across the valley. The machines faltered, stumbling under the weight of sound. Daniel charged from behind the barricade, his weapon blazing. His crew followed, striking the weakened machines. Sparks flew, metal shattered, and the ground shook with each fall. Still, more machines advanced. The fortress roared again, its red glow burning brighter. Daniel's chest tightened. If the fortress itself fully awakened, they would not survive. "Myra," he shouted over the cries. He pointed toward the fortress. "We must bring it down." She understood. Her tears streamed down her face, but her glowing eyes were steady. She nodded and motioned to her people. Together they gathered, forming a wide circle. Their cries rose, deeper and stronger than before. The sound built like a storm, echoing through the valley. The fortress shook. Its walls cracked, its lights flickered. The cries carried into its core, disrupting the energy inside. The machines stumbled, their movements breaking apart. Daniel raised his voice above the chaos. "This is it. Push harder." The tribe poured their strength into their cries. The crystals across the valley glowed until the land itself looked alive. The air shook, the ground trembled, and the fortress roared in pain. With one final wail, Myra released all the sorrow in her heart. The sound cut through the air like lightning, striking the fortress. The red lights inside shattered, the structure convulsed, and with a thunderous crash, it collapsed into the valley. Silence followed. The machines fell one by one, their red eyes fading. The ground stilled, and the air grew calm again. The wailing tribe lowered their heads, tears still falling, but their cries softened into quiet sobs. They had fought with sorrow and had won. Daniel stood among them, his chest heaving, his weapon heavy in his hand. He looked at Myra. She was exhausted, her tears endless, but her eyes shone with new strength. He stepped forward and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. She did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She touched her chest, then his, her silent bond stronger than ever. The battle was over, but Daniel knew this was not the end. The machines were defeated for now, but the tribe's sorrow carried more secrets yet to be uncovered. Humanity had given them courage, but the path ahead was still long. For the first time, though, Daniel believed they would not walk it alone. The valley was quiet again. The broken fortress lay in ruins, its red lights gone, its machines scattered lifeless across the ground. Smoke rose in the distance, curling into the gray sky. For the first time in generations, the Wailing tribe stood without chains of silence. Daniel lowered his weapon and looked around at the people. Their tears still fell, but now they were not only sorrow. Some were tears of relief, of hope, of release after years of burden. The cries that had shaken the valley moments ago now softened into gentle sobs. The storm of sorrow had passed, leaving only calm rain. Myra stood at the center, her shoulders trembling with exhaustion. Yet in her glowing eyes was something new. Strength. She looked at Daniel and then at her people, who gathered close, waiting. They had always looked to her as a guide, but now they looked to her as a leader who had carried them through the fire. Daniel stepped forward. He spoke softly, his voice steady. "It's over. You won." Myra tilted her head. She could not understand his words, but his tone carried meaning. She touched her chest and then pointed at him. A small smile formed on her face, though her eyes still shone with tears. Paul and the crew joined Daniel. They looked worn, their clothes torn, their weapons scarred, but they stood tall. Paul wiped sweat from his brow. "Captain, I think they broke their curse. Did you feel it?" Their cries changed. It was sorrow before, but now, it felt alive. Daniel nodded. He had felt it too. The cries had carried more than grief in the end. They had carried hope. The tribe gathered together, forming a circle around Myra. They began humming low, their voices blending, soft and trembling. It was not a wail this time. It was the beginning of something different. Daniel's chest tightened. "They are trying," he whispered. "They are trying to speak." The humming grew stronger, shifting into sounds that resembled words. It was rough, broken, but it was speech forming for the first time in centuries. Myra closed her eyes, her lips trembling as she pressed her hand to her heart. Then, with a shaky voice, she spoke a single word. "Free." The sound was fragile, almost lost in the wind, but it carried through the valley like a bright flame. The tribe gasped softly. Some covered their mouths. Others wept openly. For them, hearing one of their own speak was like seeing the sun after endless storms. Daniel's eyes widened. His throat tightened, but he forced a smile. He stepped closer, placing his hand gently over hers. "Yes," he said. "Free." Myra repeated the word, stronger this time. Her people followed, their broken voices joining one after another. The air filled not with cries but with words, unsteady yet beautiful. It was like listening to the birth of a new dawn. The crew stood in silence, moved by the moment. Even hardened soldiers like Paul and Marcus lowered their heads, their eyes misting. They had come expecting a rescue mission, perhaps even a battle. Instead, they had witnessed the rebirth of a people. The tribe gathered around Daniel and Myra. Children who had only known wailing now tried to shape sounds, their voices carrying laughter between attempts. Elders, who had lived lifetimes in silence, trembled as they whispered simple words. It was fragile, but it was real. Myra looked at Daniel, her tears falling freely. With effort, she spoke again. "Thank you." Daniel felt the weight of those words strike deeper than any weapon. Humanity had given them courage, but it was their own spirit that had broken the curse. He shook his head and placed a hand on her shoulder. "No. Thank you." The tribe began singing not cries, not wails, but a song. The sound rose over the valley, soft yet strong, carrying both sorrow and joy. It was a voice of memory, of survival, of a people who had suffered but refused to be broken. Daniel looked at his crew. This is history, he said quietly. We'll take this home. The galaxy must know what they've done. The Wailing tribe is no longer bound. They will never be silent again. The crew nodded. For the first time, they felt not only like soldiers but like witnesses to something greater than war. Myra turned to her people and raised her arms. Her glowing eyes shone bright, not with pain but with hope. Future, she said, her voice clear. The word carried across the valley, and the tribe repeated it together, their voices trembling yet strong. The ruins of the machines lay scattered around them, reminders of what had been broken. But now, the cries of sorrow had transformed into voices of life. As the sun broke through the gray clouds, Daniel stood among them, feeling the weight of the moment. Humanity and the tribe had fought together, not just with weapons but with hearts. What had begun as sorrow had ended as rebirth. He looked at Myra one last time. She met his gaze, her eyes bright with tears and courage. No words were needed between them, for both knew the truth. They had carried each other through the storm, and together they had given the galaxy a new song. The Wailing tribe would no longer be known for their tears alone. From that day forward, they would be remembered for the voices they reclaimed, the voices that would never again be silenced. And for Daniel, their story would stay with him forever.